then we'll let people in from the waiting room. So hello everyone, I can see you all popping up there and joining. Welcome to this Bunnahabhain tasting. We're just going to give it about a minute 30 seconds to make sure everyone can hear us all right, and that everyone's settled down and at their laptops okay. And you've got all your samples in glassware. This is the moment. If you need a glass of water, this is the moment to run out and grab it. There's definitely worse ways to spend Monday night anyway. What you reckon, Brendan?
Yeah. Definitely a good way to break in. It's already been a long week actually, but so I need this.
Yeah, no, definitely. There's that Tintin tweet. I don't know if you've seen it. It's a Twitter page, and it's like Tintin and the captain's going, "Oh, what a week!" It's turning on to going, "It's only Wednesday," and they tweet that. That's all they do. The Twitter account tweets that every Wednesday, and I'm like, yeah, I get that feeling. So, we've got two more people coming in from the waiting room, and once they're in, I think we'll start. That's been about a minute and a bit. So one more person there. Marvelous. So welcome everyone, and welcome Brendan. This is my first tasting with W Club. So hello everyone, my name is Luke. I'm just moved over from Ireland. Worked in Irish whiskey with a company called Celtic Whiskey before joining the whiskey shop. So do plenty of virtual tastings with them. They're very similar companies to the whiskey shop, dealing in Irish whiskey. I'm sure some of you, if you're on the tasting, you're into your whiskey, you might have heard of us. So I started with the company last week. So if I make a fool of myself tonight, please be forgiving. I don't know if any of you have been on to W Club tastings before. What I was thinking tonight is if we want to hear from you guys, we want to hear what you think of the lineup and get your tasting notes in. And if you put them into the chat, I'll kind of make a bit of a conversation about them, and we'll get to keep that chat box live with your tasting notes and what you're liking and not liking, or any questions you have for Brendan. So without further ado, I'll pass you over to the main man himself. And Brendan, do you want to tell people about yourself and about the lineup we're going to be tasting tonight?
Yeah, thanks, Luke. So evening, everyone. Thanks very much for coming to this Bonnehaven whiskey tasting. Got kind of like a cracking lineup of 5 whiskies for us all to taste our way through, which we'll get right into pretty soon. My name's Brendan McCarron. So I have the, I don't know, slightly pretentious job title of I'm the master distiller for the company. So I'm the master distiller for Distill International. So as well as being responsible for the production and creation of all Bunnahavens, I also look after Deanston Distillery, Tobermory Distillery, where we make Tobermory, we make Leitchig, and we also make Tobermory Gin. So I'm responsible for those 3 single malt whiskies, and I also make Black Bottle, Scottish Leader, and I get to work on some funky things as well. So I've been doing this job it's coming up for a year. So I moved company in April last year. Previous to that, I used to be responsible for whiskey creation at Glenmorangie and Ardbeg. I was there for 7 years. And then prior to that, I spent 8 years working mostly as I actually worked in every stage of creating whiskey for Diageo. So I was a maltster, I was a buyer, I was a distiller, I was a group manager. I even designed a distillery because my degree is chemical engineering. So technically I'm a chemical engineer, but I'm a pretty shitty chemical engineer. So if you need any chemicals engineered or plants designed, I'd go somewhere else. But I do enjoy whiskey.
Ethanol.
Sorry?
Except for ethanol. That's the exception, is it?
Well, I'm not sure. I don't know about like fuel ethanol plants or something like that. I wouldn't drink what they make, but yeah. So I kind of use my degree to get my foot in the door. And I remember graduating thinking, thank God I'll never have to use that again. And after briefly making penicillin for a drugs company. I got a job with Diageo and they went, great, you're a chemical engineer, you can design a whiskey distillery. I was like, shit, this is going to be troublesome. But somehow I managed, and the distillery's still there and it's still making whiskey, so thank God. And since then I've moved on to, I went into a more creative role, I guess, so actually creating whiskies, nosing, tasting, buying casks, managing inventory. But I always loved being a distillery manager too. With this job, I'm really lucky because I do get to work with a great team. I get to work with fantastic distilleries. I also think it's quite cool. A few of my distilleries are probably a wee bit lesser known and are a wee bit under the radar. So it's a great time to join the company. But I get to combine the kind of technical and production and that kind of rigor that you need. And it's something that kind of makes my, makes my heart beat, makes my blood pulse. But I also get to do the very creative side as well of making all the whiskies. So it's like, create the spirit and put it in a cask in the morning, and then, almost like cooking. It's like putting the stuff together, tasting and creating in the afternoon. In an ordinary day, which of course we all know there's no such thing as an ordinary day, so it goes about.
And you cover a lot of ground, so between Mull and Islay and Deanston.
Yeah. So I don't know. I'm assuming there's probably quite a lot of Scottish people on the call tonight. So I live in Stirling. So my wife is from Stirling. I'm actually from Coatbridge. So I'm originally from Coatbridge. So when I married my wife, she says we can, either live in Coatbridge or Stirling. So you can imagine how that one worked out. Beautiful historic town or the time capsule. So we moved to Stirling when we got married, and I kind of get around, so the blend centre, Distell have just built a £20 million blend centre next to their bottling hall in East Kilbride. So I have like a big state-of-the-art sensory lab there, which is actually the best sensory lab that I've ever worked in, and that's saying something because I think all the sensory labs have been really great, but it's just world class. So I'll commute to East Kilbride, 2 or 3 days a week in a normal week. But I'll go on like missions. So I'm going to Islay next week. I'm going up to Bonnehaven. We're going to put in a couple of new condensers, for a couple of new bits of copper replacement, and we're going to replace 2 of the wooden washbacks at Bonnehaven as well. And that's happening at the end of February. So I'm just going over with the team to make sure that we get everything right. And I've got a few things that I just want to make absolutely clear happen for the sake of the spirit quality. You never want to be known as the person who made a mess of an iconic brand, and I'm certainly not going to let that be me. Going to Deanston is a dream. So I was working from home today, but I actually went up to Deanston for a couple of hours because it's a 10-minute drive away. So it's just so easy. So yeah, works a treat. So on Tuesday next week, I will get in the car, drive up to Kinnacraig. I'm going to get the ferry over to Port, which is the port in the north of Islay, Port Askaig, and I'll be heading to Bunnahabhain. And the most popular Bunnahabhain, I would say, since I joined, the Bunnahabhain that I've made most often, the batches that I've put together more than any, are the whiskey that we're going to try first. So this is our relatively new, non-aged expression of Bunnahabhain, and it's a Bunnahabhain Stiuireadair. So that's the first whiskey that we're going to try. Our distillery is hard to spell and near enough unpronounceable. And just to make it doubly hard, we make the whiskies just as hard to pronounce and impossible to spell too. It's just a thing. It just looks like someone's vomited Scrabble onto a label. But it is Stewarder. And Stewarder is Gaelic and it means helmsman. So there's a helmsman on, here we go, here's Stewarder. I think the light in here is kind of shining off it a bit, sorry about that. But this,
we can see this, yeah. I think most people can see that, can you?
This is kind of the symbol of Bonnehaven. This is the helmsman. It's been a symbol for, a couple of 100 years. If anyone's been to Bonnehaven, you'll see it's got a pretty stunning setting. It's right on the water in the north of the island. It faces out to the Pap Jura. The Sound of Islay runs between the 2 islands, and Bonnehaven just has this. And it was always a place where boats landed. So fishermen and helmsmen are just integral and interweave with the history of Bunnahabhain. So that's why we called this one Stewarder, just named after our helmsman. So I'll tell you more about the distillery and the history and all that sort of stuff, but grab a glass, get your nose in there, get drinking basically. Try your first Bunnahabhain of the night and start to enjoy. I'll tell you what, just in case anyone's interested, I'll give you the lineup as well. Not the lineup, you'll have your pack. Just the order. We're going to do Stewarder, and then after Stewarder, we'll do the most classic Bonnehaven, which is the 12-year-old. Then after the 12-year-old, we're actually going to jump up in age. We're going to do the 18-year-old next. Then after the 18-year-old, we're going to go back to a 12-year-old, but a cask strength 12-year-old. I can see some people going, oh, I like the way he's going here, and other people are looking at me like, what's this clown doing? But that's okay. That's okay. It's my lineup. I'll pick it the way I want. And believe me, if you think of a clown now, just wait for 50 minutes, you know, and I will fully prove that judgment. After the cask strength, we're going to finish with the Aonadh, Aonadh, I think it's spelled, but the Bunnahabhain Aonadh, which is a 10-year-old. I'm picking them kind of based on, let's say, intensity of flavour. What I don't want to do is do the 12 and then do the 12 cask strength, which, you know, is a big old step up in ABV, and then try to taste the 18-year-old, which has deliberately got a real kind of, you know, poise, and it's got a slightly ethereal thing to it. So that's why we're doing a kind of, the age is kind of jumping up and down. It's just intensity of flavour that we're going up in. Anyways, that was a lot of talking when I said get a glass and start drinking. So the first whiskey here, non-aged Bunnahabhain Stiuireadair. So for some people, they'll go, oh, non-aged, that means it's rubbish, that means it's 3 years old. But I mean, come on, I think there's a more educated group here. Our most classic Bunnahabhain is 12 years old. So of course it's younger than 12. I'm not going to go into the complete breakdown, but it's just a little bit younger than 12. It's just a way to show Bunnahabhain in a different light. And it's also a way to grow the number of people who see Bunnahabhain. Because right now I'd say, I would describe Bunnahabhain as like a cult whiskey. It's an iconic Islay, unpeated, sherried whiskey. And people who know. But I guess the purpose of Stewarder is just to let a few people who don't know, just let them try it and taste it. And it's just going to pull in more and more fans for this amazing whiskey. So on the nose, it should be unmistakably sherried and Islay. And by Islay, I don't mean smoky. I just mean Islay whiskies. They just have a certain depth. They have a certain length. They have a certain complexity is such an overused word these days in whiskey. They just have like such a range of different flavours and textures and things going on in them. And all intertwined up in that is a huge amount of sherry casks. So for Bunnahabhain, almost all the casks that I purchase and have been purchased in the past are Oloroso sherry. You're looking for a lot of Oloroso sherry. There's Oloroso hogsheads, there's Oloroso butts, there's first fills, there's second fills, there's a bit of refill. There will be the occasional bourbon cask. So if you come to Bonnehaven and you look in the warehouses and you see a bourbon cask, don't go screaming and shouting and thinking you've started a scandal. We will use bourbon casks from time to time, but really, by design, it's about making unpeated, big, flavourful whiskey that goes into Oloroso sherry casks. So that's why you get that coffee beans, you know, some along the lines of cinnamon, something chocolatey. On the taste, you get, you know, they're all going to be quite thick. They're all going to be quite viscous. They're all going to have that kind of slightly honeyed syrup texture to them, and that's the sherry casks that are doing that. But as well as that texture, I get a huge amount of this kind of, it's like pears. It's pears, or not even a tasting note that you necessarily want sometimes in whiskies, but there is like a lovely, fresh, crisp green apple note in there as well. There's something slightly fruity mixed in amongst all that sherry, and that's the spirit coming through. The spirit, Bunnahabhain spirit is probably, if you had a gun to my head, I would say it's fruity, but actually it has layers of character to it, which is quite unlike most distilleries that I've visited or worked at, and I have worked at quite a few.
Oh, it's gorgeous. I suppose the first thing that jumps out of me looking at the first three in this lineup is that 46.3%. could you, while we're kind of digesting and mulling over, and I'd love to hear what everyone listening in's kind of comments are and tasting notes in the chat. Could you tell us about that ABV and why you landed on that?
Yeah, so there's a couple of reasons. So for Bunnahabhain, we are trying to make like an unashamedly classic whiskey. You know, there's a few classic whiskies and they follow classic ways of making whiskey. And for this one, it's unpeated. So we don't do, here's our unpeated and here's a super peated and here's a this and this and this. We'll do the occasional innovation and stuff, but for our core range, we just want to have classic, beautiful, unpeated whiskey, matured almost exclusively in Oloroso sherry casks. And we also want it to be, if we have a non-aged like Stewarder, we're only going to do one. We're not going to have this crazy proliferation. And then we have a 12, an 18, a 25, and a 30. Classic sort of ages. That doesn't make it boring. It doesn't make it ordinary. It's just we're trying to respect the real incredible classic ways of making Scotch. And the other way to do that is we're going to have it naturally coloured. So there's no caramel colouring. And we're going to have it non-chill filtered. Non-chill filtered, I think it's great to be non-chill filtered. I think maybe some people are getting just a wee bit too obsessed with it. Don't freak out if some of my competitors' whiskies are non-chill filtered. You can still drink them, but just know they won't be as good as mine. But it's 46%. If it's 46% in the bottle, you do not have to chill filter it. So having it slightly higher proof prevents the kind of fatty acids and the long chain esters, long chain fatty acid and esters from coming out of solution. So keeping it at 46% allows it to be non-chill filtered. The 0.3 is there for a reason. So it's 46.3 for a reason, which I don't know. So I've got no idea why it's 46.3. But someone at some point who worked for Burn Stewart, as the company was called before, Distiller, just sort of went 46. And I'm guessing they probably went, I'll add 0.3 just to be safe. And it's now a thing. And it's a thing I'm not going to change. And it's a thing I love. And I love the fact that I don't even know where the 0.3 came from. And I'm not even going to, you know, obsessively try and find out. I just like the fact that it's there. So you'll find Deanston, Bonnehaven, Tobermory, Leitchig, Tobermory Gin even, and we like 46.3.
And you mentioned the non-chill filtering there, which is obviously become a big trend in recent years, especially with newer kind of brands. Has that always been the case for Bunnahabhain, or do you know when non-chill filtering became the style?
I think it's always been the thing because you need to install equipment to do chill filtration, which they don't. So as far as I know, so I can't hand in heart go to court and say no. There's the occasional time where people are looking for something that's a bit more fun or whatever, where you'd probably find that they've been below 46.3. And then I guess before the Scotch Whisky Act kicked in and whiskies had to be 40 minimum. There might have been some, you know, back in the day. So I don't know about forever, but, you know, for a very, very long time, it's been a principled stand to make it 46.3. But don't forget, the other reason is there's some whiskies which I've made in my past and they are chill filtered. And the reason they're chill filtered is they taste better at 40%, you know. Some whiskies taste good low, some whiskies taste good high, some whiskies do both. So sometimes you could chase being non-chill filtered, but it could be at the expense of, you know, giving your whiskey the best chance for people to enjoy, because you can't just put a sign on the side of it of dilute to 40 before drinking, you know, because that's a hell of an accurate measurement and stuff. But it's also just part of the 46.3. It just helps the flavour of Bunnahabhain. It just helps the texture. It just helps everything, and it's just brilliant that we then don't have to mess with it and filter it, so people can just get it in its most uninterrupted style.
So coming back to the dram, Martin says slight brininess on the nose, which I totally get, yeah. And that almost ties back into what you were saying with the kind of Islay characteristic. Stephen says smooth and mellow, and Martin again says just to get it over 46%, obviously referring to the 0.3.
Yeah. Brininess is a big one for Bunnahabhain. So again, this one's a bit weird to me. So obviously, if you go to Bonnehaven, the distillery is right by the sea, and there is a maritime note. But in experience for me, most distilleries that have a saltiness, it tends to be because they are lightly peated, let's say, and Bunnahabhain isn't. Bunnahabhain's unpeated. So it must be something to do with that sea air, that salt air in the still house during distillation. That's my best guess at where that's coming from. You also get a little bit of saltiness from sherry casks, you know, especially if you focus in on like an Amontillado or a really nice Manzanilla. You can get that salted nuttiness coming through. But it does just have this little bit of brine. And there's Martin right away on the comments saying the brininess is less pronounced than, for example, an Old Pulteney. So the Old Pulteney has got 2 to 4 parts per million phenol, and that really does bring in that kind of saltiness. And you're right, the Bunnahabhain's just a wee bit more unpronounced. But there's a few things, and I won't bore you to death here. Well, I probably already have. But there's a few things about Bonnehaven that are worth noting. So if you ever go to the distillery, it's a big distillery. You know, it is a big big collection of large buildings hewn into the side of a cliff on this big bay that looks out at the incredible Paps of Jura. And everything else about the distillery is big as well. I mean, the name, there's like 12 letters in it, which is just wild. So it's got a big name. It does, there's a thing like, I tease marketing. I actually do like them sometimes. But they say stuff like, on the Bunnahabhain 12, on the front of it, it says, distilled in small batches. And that, you know, it drives me nuts because everything's distilled in small, or created, hand carved in small batches, you know, and that's like your pencil that you get at school or whatever. So everyone wheels out this rubbish that doesn't really mean anything. But actually, Bunnahabhain is not distilled in small batches. Bunnahabhain is, stick with me here, a tiny amount of huge batches. Okay? So most distilleries in a week will run their mash tun 20 or 30 times. Don't think I'm criticising that. That's a great way to run a distillery. But they'll do 20 or 30 mashes. Some will do 35, let's say. So those mashes go through, they ferment, then they're distilled. Bunnahabhain does 12. So we do 12 mashes a week. But our mash tun is really big. You know, so most distilleries, mash tun will be between, I don't know, 5 and 10 tons per mash. So 5 to 10 tons of malted barley for a batch. Bunnahabhain, we can do 14.5 tons. So it's big, right? This is big and it's slow and it's very traditional. So you get this big, super clear, but big production of fermentable wort. And then it goes into these huge wooden washbacks. And that's what I'm going over next week for us to put to replace 2 of those wooden washbacks. You just take all the staves out and drop in a new one. So wooden washbacks are great because, well, they look very pretty for one, but they're also great because you get all this kind of, you know, localized microflora and fauna. It's a very sexy way to say bugs. There's always different bugs in the fermentation. So alongside the yeast, mean that you just get something that's a wee bit different and a wee bit unique, you know, unique to that area and just different from anywhere else that you would ever get. And you can never truly sterilize wooden washbacks. So you always keep this thing. You're never going to over steam it or, you know, take away this distinct, unique character that's there. Then after you've done this big fermentation, you then distill it in these huge copper stills. So I used to work for the company with the tallest copper stills, Glenmorangie, but those stills are actually quite small. At Bunnahabhain, these things are beasts. I mean, I'm actually quite tall. Zoom doesn't give it away, but I'm like 6'3", 6'4". But you stand next to these things and you look like a hobbit, you know? And it's very rare that I look like a hobbit, but now, and even though I've got hairy toes, but when I'm next to these stills, they are just enormous. They're not just tall, they're big, big things. And what that means is it takes ages to distill, it takes ages to boil up this massive batch. There's a whole load of copper contact, and there's just a whole load of things going on in that distillery that are hard to understand. Like, you know, so it's moved slowly. You do a batch, it's a big commitment, and then the batch goes through and then you kind of start again. Whereas most other distilleries, it's kind of like, you know, it's going like pistons, you know, you do little batches and moving at different speeds across the different parts of the distillery. So it's an incredible place to visit. And this is part of why it has such a cult following. But it also helps create the flavour. This is why the spirit character at Bunnahabhain, as I said, if I can only give it one descriptor, it is fruity, because all distilleries should have a one-word distillery character. It's not just fruity, it's fruity, but it's also floral. And it's not just fruity and floral, it's also malty or cereally. It has that biscuit base kind of flavour you'd get from a cheesecake. It's slightly savoury. It even has an oiliness to it, which is crazy. And then this is the other one. I love to think that I know all the answers, and I'm quite experienced in whiskey, but I genuinely think if I went in a time machine and this spirit was coming off the still and they were saying, what should we use to mature this? I'll be honest, I think I probably would have recommended bourbon casks because of the fruitiness. I probably would have said this should go in real high quality bourbon casks first and second fills. So someone had the genius idea to fully mature it in sherry. And that should drown the fruit, but it doesn't. And it's because of that oiliness, and it's because of these other layers of character that are in there. Bonnehaven actually holds up to the sherry. They rather than get drowned, they intertwine, it swims in it. They complement each other so well. And it really does work, as we're going to see in this tasting. It works young, it works middle-aged, it works old, it works at high strength, it works at low strength. It's something that I've never seen before. But Bunnahabhain and sherry, they just work. Whereas Bunnahabhain and bourbon, which I would have, if I seen the character on paper, I would have recommended. Still quite nice, still perfectly drinkable and stuff, but it's just doesn't have the same sort of magic. It's just that oily, fruity, malty, floral spirit into Oloroso sherry, which is what you should be getting in the Stewarder. But I'd also recommend we now kind of jump on and try the classic 12-year-old.
Yeah, well, I was just going to say, because that's all very interesting, but my glass is definitely empty. Great in the chat there. There's no harshness in the finish, very smooth. Martin says, yes, not harsh, but a lingering finish, I think. I don't know about people listening, but I've got a lot of questions after what you've just said. But maybe we'll come on to the 12-year-old first, if you want to tell us a bit about that before we stick our snouts in our mouths on it.
Yeah. So it takes quite long to taste the first whiskey, because I'm giving out some of the facts and the information and stuff like that. But for this one, this truly is trying to minimize the moving parts and keep it as classic as you possibly can. So this is just great, fruity, floral, malty, oily Bunnahabhain, matured for 12 years. And my aim is for it to be in Oloroso sherry casks the whole way. It can be butts and hogsheads. It's a combination of first fill, second fill, and refill sherry casks, just to make something that has like sherry-led flavours, but it's not a sherry bomb. That's not the aim of this. You're looking for that roundness, that balance. You want to find something like, I don't think this thing exists, but if you can imagine like an apple and pear biscuit, that's the kind of flavours of the spirit that should come through. And it'll, of course, mingle in with the dried fruits. It'll combine in with the dried fruits, the cinnamon, the mace, that kind of allspice, and also that lovely nuttiness that sherry always brings, and the saltiness that got called out right at the beginning.
No, it's definitely nutty. That bit of chocolates there again, maybe a lingering bit of tobacco there as well, and some maybe kind of burnt sugar too, but not as you get from some of the more kind of sweeter wine cask finishes. But no, it's very interesting, those.
Yeah. So again, 46.3. It's not. I'm not like this with all whiskies, but I tend to find that this works best neat, but if you want to add a splash of water, you'll find that just the sherry notes will drop down a little bit, and it'll promote more of that kind of tangy white fruits. Maybe a bit of peach will come through, something else. But I'm not a super traditionalist, okay? Don't worry, I'm not like, only drink it the way it is, otherwise you can't drink whiskey or anything like that. But this one just worked for me. I just think it pours out the bottle and it's just ready to drink. Just has great balance, great poise. It's just a great whiskey.
Yeah, well, Jonathan definitely agrees with you there, saying one of my all-time favorites, just beautiful. And Katrina says mine too. So yeah, we have a few fans in the house.
It has this kind of, like, it's quite good, like certain times I get to travel around the world, obviously pre-COVID, and you get to talk to people in foreign countries, and it's amazing. It's quite tiring, but it's amazing, and it's great to see that whiskies. But it's good doing a tasting in your home country, because you can say stuff like it tastes like a Werther's original, and that makes sense, Whereas you try that in Taipei with a translator, and honestly, my translator nearly had a heart attack trying to translate Werther's original into Taiwanese. But yeah, it does have that kind of, dark toffee, boiled sweets, brown sugar, creme cafe. There might even be that, so don't go smoky with me. There's no smoke in it, but even that kind of sweet tobacco aroma, the actual tobacco, not it burning like sherry dip cigars and all this kind of stuff.
Yeah. I'm not sure if the TikTok generation know what a Werther's original is, but I get what you're saying.
Sure. There's a TikTok we need to make happen.
Martin says this one never fails to impress, and Phil says an absolute classic. I totally agree. You mentioned earlier there about the fruity flavors. We hear a lot from different brands about how they come from kind of still shape and reflux, and you mentioned the size of the stills at Bonnehaven. Do you think how much of the character of that still is giving you those flavors?
So the stills absolutely influence flavour, but they probably get more press than they deserve across Scotland. This is not just Bonnehaven. But it's just the easiest one to bring to life, and it's the easiest one to visualise, and it's the easiest one to chat about. But really, there's a whole series of stepping stones that you have to get right. Otherwise, it doesn't matter what shape your still is, But for Bunnahabhain, it is using unpeated malt is pretty key. Then using this old traditional style mash tun, which allows for a very slow drainage. So it just makes the worts very, very clear. There's no solids in them. Another bit which brought a smile to my face, because my previous role involved using high salty, high mineral content water. But again, Bonnehaven is supplied from a spring. So it's salty water. And what that does is it means during fermentation, you get like a more active fermentation, which kicks out lots of crazy flavour. So in truth, the biggest contributor to flavour at any distillery, and Bunnahabhain, no mistake, is fermentation. The length of your fermentation, if you deliberately keep it short, you're going to make it meatier, you're going to make it more robust. It tends to be heavier as well, which is a good thing. Don't think one of these is better than the other. If you allow it to ferment for like a medium time, you start to create and form fruity flavours, lots of esters. If you allow something to really ferment out for a very, very long time, it's going to start going floral. And then if you let it ferment to be see if someone starts talking to you about saying we have the longest fermentations in the world or something, just smile and move on, because it's going to taste like shit. Because eventually it goes quite plasticky and you get this acrolein. Acrolein is like that stuff that's on top of microwave meals, if you go too long. But generally speaking, a nice long fermentation would be light, floral, perfumed. Just before that, it'd be quite fruity, and quite early on it'd be meaty. So it's getting that right. And then after that, the stills absolutely will allow either a lot or almost no copper contact. And that's either to strip out the sulphurs to allow the lighter flavours to show, or if you're trying to make a heavier whiskey, which is great, it's great to make a heavy whiskey, don't think it's a bad thing, you might keep the stills dirty so there's not a lot of copper contact, and you'd use short stills and you'd run them quite hot, and then you'd get something that was way meatier and more kind of like a beef stock sort of flavour to it that then would mature out. So stills are important, and Bunnahabhain our stills just being absolutely gigantic. It's a long old journey for the spirit to go on, and it means lots of copper contact, lots of condensing, lots of reflux, as we call it. And we also have like very large shell and tube condensers, so there's a huge amount of copper contact as it turns back into a liquid too.
No, that's fascinating. We've got a few more comments there in the chat. Duncan says the taste reminds me of Black Forest Gatto. I totally get what you mean. Martin says, strangely, I do get a bit of dark chocolate on the palate. Nascerino, spelling he says as well. I'm not actually sure what that is, what Nascerino is, or if I pronounced that wrong.
Mascherino cherry, or the wee Mascherino
Oh,
cherry.
maraschino cherries. Yeah.
It's either that, or it's like some sort of play on words, like for a non-aged statement, cherry from the bar.
Well, that'd be very clever. We'll give him that one. Graydon says getting the chocolate. He's agreeing there. And Clifford says raisins and Madeira. And Stephen Fisher combines it all with chocolate raisins. So some great comments.
I think Clifford's in particular with the Madeira, it's crazy that to me is keeping the balance, because it gets this kind of oxidized but fortified kind of flavour, a wee bit like balsamic vinegar, a wee bit like something like that. And what I tend to find is when you over sherry a whiskey, which I've done in my past a lot, what you tend to get is you just get the chocolates. You just get chocolate and nothing else that's when you know the sherry's dominated. But you still get that slightly oxidized thing, and you still get some of the fruits. That's when you know what Bonnehaven is still present in the final spirit that's put together. It never ever gets dominated by the sherry, which is why it's brilliant to work with. Great at different ages, great at different strengths.
No, definitely. I don't know about yourself, Brendan, but we could come on to the 18-year-old now if you're up for it.
Yeah.
I'm actually going to leave a bit of the 12 there because I don't know if anyone at home wants to do this or if you recommend this, but I would like to have a bit left so I can compare it to the 12 cask strengths as well when we get to that one, just to see. But that's my own personal thing. No one has to do that. So tell us about this 18-year-old.
Yeah. So again, it's very much the same sort of cask makeup as the 12-year-old. So the 18-year-old, it actually does, just because of our stock. So at Bonnehaven, and this is something I'm trying to change, but I guess previous owners of the distillery have been slightly cautious about production. And I don't think they've really quite believed in how good this distillery is. And they've sort of thought Islay is for smoke heads. No one's going to understand our whiskey. And the small amounts that we've laid down have been spectacular, but there's just never been enough. But this is kind of like my job. This is my mission, if you like. It's my lifetime goal, which, being from Coatbridge, the average lifetime is probably about my age right now at 42. So who knows? But there's just never enough stock. So what you tend to find is the 18-year-olds tends to be 18 years minimum, let's say. And there's a few years of extra age in there as well, just as I try and balance the recipe across the portfolio. But again, it's just that great spirit. And Oloroso sherry in the main, a little bit of refill cask in there. And 18 is a magical age for whiskey. 18 is just maybe the sweet spot to end all sweet spots for whiskey. And it's other people that say this, not me. But it's most people's favourite whiskey from Bonnehaven. It's my favourite whiskey from Bonnehaven. And every other whiskey I've ever worked on, every other distiller that I can think of, my preference is the 10 to 12-year-old sort of age. I think that's the best age. And I'm spoiled. I get to taste, everything, so I'm lucky. But with this is my favourite Bonnehaven. This one just does everything. It has a lightness, a touch. The floral notes are way more pronounced. Yet it's thicker. It has more of the kind of coffee. It has that rancio, balsamic Madeira kind of thing going on in it. There's really, really intensely dried raisins, but it's almost like you bite into them and they pop, and they're unctuous and sweet and rich. It just goes everywhere. And it's a very common phrase on Islay, because I spent 3 years of my life living on Islay. Best 3 years of my life, I would say. Or some of the best years of my life. And I've still got many, many friends in Islay, and I go back as much as I can. And you hear it all the time. And it's what everyone sort of messaged me when it came out that I was moving to Distiller in Bonnehaven. They were saying this is the best 18-year-old whiskey on the island. So it's a very, very highly regarded whiskey. And if I haven't talked it up enough, if you don't like it, then it's never going to happen. But it's just amazing whiskey.
No, it's got an extraordinary nose. It is very, very complex. I get a bit like a freshly trimmed hedge, like in a good way, like like that kind of the kind of floral, grassy notes.
Yeah. It's still rich, but it's like being outside. It's like that.
Yeah, it's almost like you're in a an advert for a fabric softener or something, you know.
We need to work on your marketing.
Katrina says, I almost get a meaty taste. Martin says, sweet and slightly musty on the nose. Matt says, the 18-year-old smells really salty on the nose. So that's been obviously a bit of a theme. And Phil D says, sweet sherry, leather, and toffee. I definitely get the toffee. And Graham says, musty and tobacco sweet. So fantastic tasting notes so far, yeah.
And these all kind of, believe it or not, although they sound quite different, they all play into the same thing. Like if we did a tasting panel, you start to understand that you'll have 10 people tasting the same thing. But what you need to work out, it's not just what you smell, but it's how you verbalize it so that you know everyone's tasting the same thing. So to some people, leather will be to other people meat, be to other people like this kind of, what I say, rancio and balsamic vinegar, this kind of oxidized flavour, which then will come out to some other people as that kind of slightly musty flavour as well. So it's all these common themes. It's just that wood, sherry, and spirit all kind of coming together. It's just it just creates like it's extra layers and just extra roots for the flavour to go. And really, they just come from, frankly, waiting 18 years. It's as much a triumph of patience as it is. I'd love to say it's my creativity and charm that makes it taste that way, but really it's patience and great task.
Martin says, very complex taste, sherry sweet, some woodiness. I definitely got some woodiness on the palate rather than the nose. David Brewster says, like eating Christmas pudding while looking at a bonfire in your neighbour's backyard. Are you in your neighbour's backyard looking at a bonfire, or are you in your own backyard looking at your neighbour's bonfire? That's the question there, David. Tony says, wow, first time to try this, won't be my last, amazing body, pretty much perfect. So we spoke about you and me and the whiskey in that one. The difference in flavour profile from the palate to the finish is remarkable. I definitely agree with Duncan there. Yeah. There is the nose, the kind of the first hit and the finish. They're all, it's almost like three different whiskies, and that's what you want.
Yeah, takes you on a proper journey. Just like David, we use stolen Christmas pudding. It must be stolen. I mean, it's pretty much February. But yeah, this whiskey definitely takes you on a journey, that's why I love it as well. Like genuinely, most whiskies that I drink, they're in that 10 to 12 year region, and it's what works. But yeah, Bunnahabhain 18 is my favourite. Has been my favourite Bonnehaven for, when did I first start drinking Bonnehaven? Probably in 2006 or something like that. So it's been my favourite Bonnehaven since then, and I do not think it'll ever get knocked off its perch. It just completely works for me. Just stunning.
Nicholas asked there, does the aging make it more oily?
So this is a great question because it allows me to answer something that I want to talk about. But see, in truth, like, there's whiskies out there in the world that to me taste great in bourbon cask, or there's whiskies that taste great in lots of different casks, or there's whiskies that do this. There's some whiskies that it's not every single expression, but they tend to be better young. Smoky whiskies, a lot are like that. There's some whiskies that tend to be great at certain sweet spots, so you'll have a great 10 or a great 12, but as they age, they can go very randomly off in different directions. There's some whiskies that are great at cask strength, and there's some whiskies that just aren't. And it's because of how the texture changes over maturation, or how the smokiness, or how the fruitiness. But the really weird thing about Bonnehaven, and I'm still trying to wrap my head around it, because I've now got, obviously, access to all of it, and I get to taste often. But Bunnahabhain, in a great way, and it's a bad word if you're a whiskey maker, is consistency. You don't want to be the most consistent person. That's like someone that you're into saying they like you as a friend. You don't want to be there. You don't want to be consistent in whiskey. It's the little micro variations and changes that make it this thing that we've all just love. But there is a certain level of consistency to Bunnahabhain. It seems to stay quite constant to me. The oiliness, the balance, the combination of spirit character, distillery character, and wood character, it seems to stay just about even at young ages, at middle ages, at old ages, at high strengths, at low strengths. So I would say that it's a hard question to answer. I would say there's almost like a straight line relationship between the oiliness and the age that it gets to. And it's something that I love. And that's why we will innovate with Bonnehaven and we'll do fun things for fish. But I think the biggest thing I want to do with Bonnehaven is make more of it and keep the same recipe, make it fruity and oily, get the best Oloroso sherry cask I can afford and put the two together and just apply patience, you know, because I think there is this kind of consistency across the whole thing. So my short answer is I don't know if aging makes it more oily. I think it's kind of consistently oily throughout. But yeah. And then Martin said, would you say that leaving this beyond 18 years would be detrimental? Well, hopefully not, because this is the 25-year-old right here. And we also do a 30-year-old and a 40-year-old. And they are very, very regular award winners and hugely popular batches that we make each year. I honestly think it's the first whiskey I've encountered that seems to work at every age. But I think it's because there's not so many moving pieces on the other side. It's just get great sherry and make it work.
Well, now that we're talking about age, can you tell us about your warehouse setup? I know there's across Islay, there's a huge plethora from dunnage to all different other types. What kind of setup do you have, and how much your stock is matured on the island? How much the stock's matured off island? What's the situation there?
Yeah, so across Islay, there's actually not that many warehouses in Islay. You know, there's a couple of dunnage warehouses on each site, mainly, and then there's some new ones being built at the moment. But we have, so they've all got ridiculous numbering systems, which seems to be a tradition for warehouses. But we've got 6 or it might be 7 warehouses on site. They're dunnage style warehouses at the far end of the distillery. So there's a dunnage complex, which is just named one warehouse. And we then have several that are like 4 or 5 stories high, but they're all traditionally stowed and stacked warehouses. We then have one warehouse at the top of the hill, which is a slightly more modern warehouse, but I don't know when it was built, probably the 60s. And it's racked. And then that'll carry, let's say, most of the Bunnahabhain that we produce, but there'll be some of it on the mainland as well. So we'll bring some to the mainland, and I have quite a bit of Bunnahabhain maturing in Port Ellen's warehouse, for example, down in Port Ellen, which was quite a handy setup for me, but they're now reopening their distillery, so I'd imagine they're going to want the space back quite soon. But yeah, so we mature in a few places, but mainly on Islay. But I don't think it'd be possible to completely mature on Islay. But whenever new warehouses are built in Islay, I'm knocking on the door and trying my best to get first dibs on the space. That's not for a quality reason, as much as everyone wants to believe that. A great cask and a great warehouse is a great cask and a great warehouse. It doesn't really matter where in Scotland it is. Just the same goes for a warehouse. But the reason I want Islay is it's just more sustainable. And it just makes sense. We just know, hand on heart, it just makes more sense. The people who distill Bunnahabhain would be way better if those are the people who put it into a cask, move it the shortest distance, and then lay it down for the next 12 years.
Yeah, no, that makes perfect sense. I don't know if about people listening at home, but will we come on to the caster and 12-year-old?
Yeah, yeah. So let's go for this. So again, it is in some ways it's quite a simplistic tasting that we've done, because really we've just tried Bunnahabhain in 4 different stages, if you like. You know, a little bit younger than 12, a little bit older than 12 at 18. Now we're just, rather than moving by age, because it's always been great Bunnahabhain spirit in sherry casks, mainly Oloroso sherry casks. Now we're just taking the 12, and this is something we're going to do. I hope to do this once a year. So this is just making a batch of Bunnahabhain 12, but just before I do that, just siphoning off some casks. And this isn't cherry picking, you know, the strongest or the lightest cask in, but just taking some of the casks to one side and just dropping a batch that's just higher strength. It'll come out of the cask and it'll be the strength that it is, but it just shows off. And I'm not a huge cask strength whiskey fan, but it just shows that, again, this crazy, like, symbiotic relationship that exists between Bonnehaven and sherry even works at really high strengths, because in a way it goes lighter. So it should go deeper and it should go sharper and it should go spicier. but it actually goes super floral on the nose to me. It goes super floral, surprisingly a little nose prickle, Duncan is saying, and absolutely, it's got like a syrupy. It's almost got like a syrupy blanket wrapping up any of the rougher edges. The same way you would use a vermouth to make a martini or a Manhattan or a Rob Roy. The sherry just seems to envelop it. So even though it's at a higher strength, still has that. It's like lavender and rosehip dropped into, I don't know, like fruits frying in butter. There's just all these kind of flavors. The richness comes with tasting it.
Well, there's another comment there from Martin saying hardly any alcohol burned from the cask strength, and that's to follow the comment from Duncan. Now, it's probably true that this is because it's an exceptional whiskey. It's also because we're probably on our fourth whiskey tonight. That always helps the cask strength taste not hit as hard.
But it is true. It is true. Even if we were just to try this first, it's one of the things that we noticed. So again, previous roles that I've been in, it's an obvious way to make new whiskey. Let's make it cask strength. And for some things that would work, and for other things we would resist it massively. Dr. Bill Lumsden, who I worked for before, he's not released many cask strength Glenmorrangies, because it tightens up and it becomes a bit just one dimensional, whereas it should be this beautiful explosive flavour and complexity. So when I first heard about the plans to make this cask strength Bonnehaven, I will be honest, I kind of bristled a little bit. I was like, I'm not sure that's a good idea, and so I sort of said that as well. I think it's a good. Okay, the idea's happened, but I'm here now. Is it all right for me to maybe challenge that slightly? And they're like, yeah, go away and have a think about it. Well, what is it makes you nervous? And I was like, well, it's just if a whiskey was to 46.3, sometimes a single cask, it makes sense to make it cask strength because you're selling tiny volumes. But this is going to be a batch. It's a very small batch, but it's a batch, and I just don't know. I just don't know. And then I went away and I started to draw in samples and I started to taste the cask strength. And that's when I started to understand this crazy thing that, Bonnehaven just to exist in all regions as long as you keep the cask makeup the same. And then I was like I was just like an overnight convert. I was like, we need to do more of the cask strength 12-year-old. But unfortunately, our stocks, I can't exaggerate this enough, our stocks are super constrained. So when we made this, like the attention, the online sale that we had, like just through our own distillery shop, it sold out in an hour or something like that. It was wild.
Yeah.
It went like wildfire.
There's definitely a demand out there in the market for cask strength, and it's funny because I love a good cask strength whiskey. That when we've done tastings in the past, people often ask different brands, "Oh, why don't you do more cask strengths? Why don't you do this, this, and this?" And you can see why, hardcore whiskey heads love a cask strength, but to a lot of the general public, 40% is strong. They can't handle that, let alone a cask strength whiskey. So it is difficult to find that balance. We got some great comments coming in there, including Matt about the Rob Roy, yet another cocktail I've never heard of, he says, and he lists the ingredients. So it is basically a Manhattan with smoky whiskey. I believe it's named after an 1820s play by about Rob Roy, who was a legendary Scottish freedom fighter. Then we have Jonathan, who says, really elegant and pretty. Again, I don't know if it's about you or me. And then he says, not what I expect from a cask strength. Stephen says, has tastes like you mix chocolate, yogurt, and raisins together. And I saw that. I took another sip, and I was like, I don't know if it's suggestive or if it's on the nose, but I like where you're going with that, Stephen. And Martin says, this is interesting, just like a related series of whiskies and subtle differences. And that's the other interesting thing with, as you say, if you're doing a different batch of this every year, and obviously the ABV and things are going to vary, being able to maybe year on year, you won't notice a big difference, but in 4 years' time, when you look back at the 2022 do from 2026, do you think you'll notice big changes in how the whiskey develops? Oh, right. Sorry. 1 second there. Try and get a handle on the Zoom. There you go. Should work for you now.
Sorry, I was going to, so I muted myself, coughed, and then it's like, you can't unmute yourself. So I was, oh shit. No, it's true. It's true. So I really like these kind of tastings. So if we all get together and do a Deanston tasting, for example, which is one of the other distilleries I work on, Deanston is this crazy waxy character, which actually encourages it to work in lots of different casks. And there's times when it works and there's times when it doesn't. So we could do like a super rangy kind of tasting, similar for Leitchig, which is super smoky, but you can do it smoky with wine. You can do it smoky in classic bourbon. It works in sherry. It works in port. All over and you can go all over the place. But I love this one where these whiskies are all different, but on paper it's kind of there's a lot more similarities to each of them. So there's this common theme, you know, it's like a series of books that are a trilogy, or you know, there's something like different seasons of a show that you love to watch. There's commonality in all of them, but there is these differences that go off left, right, and centre. So it's a great, more subtle but different flavour in each of the whiskies.
Yeah, no, the TV show analogy is a good one. I hope your version of the TV show stays better for longer than, you know, The Simpsons or most TV shows, you know.
Yeah, I don't worry. This whiskey tasting isn't going to end like Game of Thrones, like you know. We're going to stay strong right to the end. We're going to stay strong right to the end.
Yeah, we're passing these castrants in the shops, being like, why are they still making those? You know.
So that's one for me. It's quite funny. So I have like I've had a love for Bonnehaven I first drank it at a mate's wedding in 2006. I got into whiskey probably around about 2004. So I'd be 24. I'm 1980 was born. So I'd be about 24, 23 when I started drinking whiskey. And I'd be 26. And I was a smoky drinker. So this guy was like, oh, this is an Islay whiskey. I probably wasn't as good at the locales and stuff, but I just started working in the whiskey industry. So I had some Lagavulin with me and stuff. And I tried Bonnehaven. I was like, oh, wow, it's not that smoky. And it's like, no, it's not smoky at all. But my love affair kind of started from there. But it's quite funny. So if you look at the kind of whiskies that are in my cabinet, or if you see the whiskies that I love on Islay from other distilleries or whatever, my natural bias, and there was a few people who knew about me at Glenmorangie, and then when I moved here, my natural bias would be for smoky whiskey in bourbon casks. So a lot of people thought, when you move to Bonnehaven, you're going to make way more of Moynia, which is the smoky Bonnehaven that we make. You're going to make way more smoky, aren't you? And you're going to start putting into bourbon. And I was like, absolutely not. I mean, it's great. Well, the smoky Bonnehaven's incredible, but it's a little niche thing to do from time to time. I was like, no. My love affair from Bonnehaven is because it's the one that is quite different from my bias, you know, quite different from where I naturally go to, and yet I love it so much. And another thing that's always been my bias is whiskey that's, you know, at between 40 and 46%. You know, cash strength has always been something I quite like because I'll add water to it and I get a bigger dram. But this is, you know, fast becoming one of my favourites. And it's almost like I'm almost wishing time away to drop the next batch and make another batch of cash strength 12. So it's just like it's a paradox for a lot of people Bonnehaven, and it's like a personal paradox for me. It's the opposite of what I bias to in almost every place that makes me love it even more.
Yeah, well, you know, but sometimes those kind of things work. Like, you know, when you're taken out of your, I don't want to say comfort zone, but you know what I mean. Like, you know, forced to do something different, and it works even better. Like, yeah. Duncan says, I didn't articulate that very well, but I think you got what I was trying to say. Duncan says, good year in 1980. Graham says, Venn diagram. I have one thing in common, but they all have their differences, and that's well said. That's the quote for the night, maybe. Will we come on to our final whiskey?
Yeah, I would say so. So we've had this commonality, and yes, Duncan, 80, definitely a good year. You're aging considerably better than me, I must say. Well done on the moisturizer. That must be some kind of, I don't know, extra special cream or something you're using. Yeah, last one. So this is one of our limited edition releases. So this is different. Now, it does still have a bit of commonality for Bonnehaven in that there's, let's say, half the batch is sherry cast. But with this one, we've tried to, remember I was saying earlier, like, to me, Bonnehaven is big. So Bonnehaven, the distillery size is big. the batch sizes, although we make a tiny amount of them and our overall production's small, our actual batches are big, and just the level of complexity, the level of flavour in there is big. Everything's big. And this is a 10-year-old Bunnahabhain called Aonadh, and it means, you know, marriage or uniting or bringing together. And what this one was is we just decided to like double down on big casks. So we were thinking about making a ruby port matured Bunnahabhain, so all in ruby port, and it was kind of beautiful in its own way and full of, you know, Ribena. Again, I'm in the UK, I don't need to say blackberries and blackcurrants, but it had this kind of crazy Ribena, and this like unbelievable purple flavour to it. Great word for a Scottish accent, purple. But everything in there was just incredible. But there was Julianne, who's my master blender, she works in my team. She was looking at it going, do you know, it's actually, it's not totally Bunnahabhain. So she thought about abandoning the project. But then she went, do you know what? I wonder what happens if we take this punchy, big, purple, juicy, sticky, port matured Bunnahabhain, and I wonder if we start marrying that together with more traditional, but still big and flavourful Bonnehaven and sherry casks. And the combination is what you get. So you get something that is a little bit more biased towards the wood flavour. It's a little bit less balanced. It's going to be one that some people go, oh yeah, this is incredible. And it's going to be for other people where they go, do you know what, this one's less for me. And that's the whole point of doing a one-off, a special release. It's just trying to show how you kind of tip the scale more into wood and more into those dried fruit flavours and more into those kind of, it's not just fruity sweet, it's like sugar-coated candied sweet fruits.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's got an extraordinary nose. Matt's purple burglar alarm is the best phrase for a Scottish, which I was actually told that the night before I left Ireland, or actually not the night before I left, but the night before I finished my last job, I was told to go around and get all these Glaswegians to say purple burglar alarm. So there you go. Martin says this is more like a space side on the nose to me. I don't know what your thoughts on that are. Nicholas says so special. Looks similar to Buna Erig Negreen, but more woody. And Katrina says love it. So what do you reckon in the space side comparison?
So I guess it depends on the space side, but I'm perhaps wrong. But what I'd say is like sometimes space side whiskies, they invite in a good way. They invite in a lot of cask influence, you know. So if you do a kind of a big sherried or a wine finish, or even the bourbon cask, space side, if you leave it long enough and use more powerful cask, you're going to invite in a lot of wood flavouring, and you get that lovely roundness, and you get that kind of oaky spice, which is such a get out of jail free tasting note, oaky spice, because it covers many a sin. But I'm using it, and I'm not ashamed to. But you get all of these bigger flavours. So maybe I'm wrong, but I would suggest why Martin's agreeing with me that it's just more cask led. You know, the other ones have been 50% distillery character, 50% cask, or 40-60, let's call it. This one's more, there's still Bunnahabhain in there. You still get that kind of conference pear, you know, right juicy pear note, but really it's more about the, you know, sweeter, more caramelly, layered, thicker, candied cask notes that are coming through instead. So it might be that. It might be that.
Yeah, possibly. Stephen says much warmer in the mouth as well. It's amazing considering the ABVs aren't too dissimilar. Yes, I definitely personally feel this much more like a cask strength than the 12-year-old.
Yeah, I would agree. And actually, this one I would suggest dropping a bit of water into.
I'll give that a go myself there.
Yeah, I'd say if you drop the water into it, you get more of these kind of, it is those kind of like flavours. Oh, there you go. So Ian's just like said that more. It's caramelized fruit, and it's also, you know, those kind of bright coloured candy chews, you know, that probably are full of E numbers, but they're delicious. It's those kind of flavours that I get. So lime, raspberry, blackcurrant, but it's not the fruits. sweeties that are flavoured with those kind of flavours that I get coming through it. Yeah.
Yeah, no, it was a good shout for me. And Martin says, yes, it does a bit more burn. I'm not even sure if burn is the right for it. I don't know, is it astringent, the word, that kind of way the alcohol kind of, it's not quite the acidity or tannic you get from kind of cask flavors, but it just kind of grips the back of your tongue as if like the alcohol vapors are sucking out the moisture.
It's a more traditional cask strength. And again, sorry, almost, and maybe I'm just, going for confirmation bias, but to me, it just keeps confirming to me that more and more and more Bunnahabhain and Oloroso sherry is just, such a lock, and that's why cask strength it had this unbelievable smoothness. Whereas this, it's a great cask strength. I think with the water, it just, this one's cask strength because it's a limited edition, and it's just it's a slightly more special. It's going to be a one-off. You're never going to repeat it, so it just makes sense to, put some more ABV in there. And again, a wee bit more bluntly, consumers expect it from limited editions and they prefer it, so that's what you do. But with a little bit of water, I think that it does create more of a delicious drink. Is that too cheesy? I think that is too cheesy, but I've just realised we're being recorded, so I'll need to stick with it. Need to double down. It's delicious.
Yeah, opens up beautifully with water, as Phil says, and I totally agree. Trinidad, is there a discount on the whiskies we tried tonight? There is going to be a Whiskey Wednesdays email coming through on Wednesdays with some discounts, and there's definitely going to be more of that stuff coming on over the next days and weeks and months, which there hasn't been much of in the last couple of weeks. But now, I've only started in the role last week, so we're getting rolling with that. But as of tonight, I don't think there's a live discount on the Bonnehaven, but there may be at some point this week, definitely. But either way, go for it, pick them up. They're worth it at all prices. Isn't that right, Brendan?
So yeah, this is where it's reassuringly expensive, or whatever is the right word. But I honestly, I'm not making this up. If there's some way that I can prove it to you, fine. But hopefully you realise that I'm fairly honest about what I do. Our stocks are super low. It's not some manufactured thing to say, oh, we don't have much so that we can charge more. I've never seen such a constrained stock as I've seen at Bonnehaven. So sadly, the people delight and enjoy Bonnehaven, but the thing that really disappoints them is the lack of it on the shelf. It tends to run out from time to time, but we're slowly but surely trying to just lay down just a little bit more. But that's why it's not a heavily discounted whiskey. It's just because I could honestly, I think personally, I could sell 10 times as much as we have, and I'm a terrible salesman. But
you've been an impressive salesman tonight, I must say. I'm thinking, Jesus, if he can distill as well as he can talk, he's some man.
If only it was true.
Nicholas is coming from a Frenchman. Love the quality, the commitment, love the humor, love the accent. 1,000 merci to our Bourbon converted sherry man. So there you go.
Thank you, Nicolas. Merci beaucoup.
Perfect. Well, Duncan has just confirmed to me that there will be a discount on some of the Bunnahabhain range going out to the guests. So my apologies on that confusion. That's my first day getting used to things. So we'll get that sorted definitely. So stay tuned for that one. Martin, so thanks.
85% or
85% is what you'll still have to pay. Martin, thanks for the evening. A great insight into Bunna, and it's been brilliant. So thank you for joining us. If there's any more points that anyone wants to get to, or anything we haven't covered that might pop up to people after this, do drop us an email to the same link, the same address that you got the Zoom link sent out to, and we'll get it answered. Either someone from the whiskey shop will answer it, or we'll pass it on to you guys and get it sorted. So we'll stay tuned for the discount code, and thank you so much for joining us, Brendan. It's been fantastic. Is there anything you wanted to touch on before we finished up?
I'd say you very much for coming. I've really loved seeing the comments. I mean, it is an incredible whiskey, so I was confident that would come out, and it is, you know, it is a massive honour to be involved with it, even for a short time, like, you know, over its history. But I knew it'd be a big hit, and it's great to see that it was. So yeah, just thanks for coming, and I'm sure we'll do a Leitchig and a Deanston and a Tobermory tasting, and hopefully you'll come back for some more of my banal chat. And it's the same jokes at the next tasting, but it's different whiskey, so you might enjoy it. And if you have any more questions, come and find me at one of the distilleries. You'll see me on LinkedIn or on Instagram if you want. I kind of tend to answer questions on there quite a lot. And yeah, enjoy. Thank you very much. Cheers, Luke.
Marvellous. Well, thank you, and we'll talk again soon. Cheers.
Bye.
Bye.